Liam Moreland. I'm the University of Waterloo's Web Accessibility Consultant. We'll be talking today about web accessibility, how to make websites that can be used by everyone, regardless of any disabilities that they may have. This is an introductory level course, which will set the foundations for further learning, and of course stands on its own as a good beginning knowledge for your understanding of web accessibility. If you're doing more elaborate work in HTML programming or making forms from scratch versus through our web form system, there's additional things you need to know, and this will be a great foundation for starting there. So this is what Tim Berners-Lee, the founder of the World Wide Web, had to say. The important thing about the web is it's about information communication. We want everybody to be fully involved and able to access the information that we provide on the websites of the university. So of course, I know all of you are working on WCMS websites because you're part of our team, and that makes that is a big advantage because the WCMS, of course, takes care of a lot of the web accessibility aspects of websites. But even so, anyone who's working on a website needs to be concerned about accessibility because the parts of the website that you can edit, you can do them in ways that are more or less accessible. And of course, if you're doing work on the WCMS team on the programming side, then making sure that the templates and other aspects of the system are made accessible is key to our work. You're welcome to ask questions as you go along. Yeah, you can raise your hand or put them in the chat, and we'll take those questions as they come up. But let's get started by thinking about disabilities. What are some of the kinds of disabilities that people may have? You can type those into the chat if you like. What are some ways that people can be disabled that would have an influence on their ability to use websites? Okay, hearing disabilities. Yes, if a person is not able to hear, then they will not be able to view video content or a podcast, perhaps, any kind of audio content. Visual impairment, that's usually the one that is thought about the most because we interact with our computers mostly by looking at the screen. If you can't see what's on the screen, then you need some other way of getting that information. And visual impairment could be complete visual impairment, where a person can't see at all, or it could mean that they have vision that is reduced in some way. So they may not be able to differentiate certain colors, or they may not be able to focus on things that are small, so that they may need text to be enlarged quite a bit, that they may be using screen magnifiers. A person could have a speech impairment. If a person needed to participate in a video conference where people are expected to talk, not being able to speak would mean that they couldn't do that. Any other thoughts of impairments? Because there are a few other ones. The person has a motor impairment. Oh, dyslexia. Okay. Yes, that could make it difficult for someone to read. Or a learning impairment? Absolutely. Some people who are able to see the screen may use a screen reader anyway, because they can learn better if they are reading the text by looking at it at the same time that they're listening to a screen reader read the text to them. There could also be motor impairments, where a person may not be able to use their hands or their arms or some other disability, which means that they can't use a mouse or a keyboard the way that is most familiar to most users. And there's also photoepilepsy, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. So let's keep those in mind as we go through this. So the web is about information transmission, And if we just think about the different ways that information is communicated between people, we can get a sense of the impact that different kinds of disabilities will have on the ability of people to communicate. If you think about the original way that people communicated through speech, if you can hear and speak, then you're able to participate. Having a visual impairment cuts you off from body language and gestures, but the majority of communication you're still able to participate in. When we look at the rise of written communication forms, now the important thing is that you can see written work and that you can use your hands to move a pencil or pen or whatever you're writing with. But if you're not able to hear, you're still able to access that communication media. And of course, there are ways of getting around the inability to see a written document. Like you can have Braille, you can have an audio book, you can have a large print book. These are all ways of getting around it, but they're all expensive. And not every written work is available that way. And if you think about Braille in particular, it's expensive to print and it's also very large. I once saw a copy of The Hobbit by Tolkien in Braille, and The Hobbit is not a very long novel. It can be a small, like paperback pocketbook type thing. Well, this Braille version of it was 4 volumes. Each volume was letter-sized paper, 8.5 by 11, and about an inch thick. So we're talking about a very, very large, heavy book in order to put a Braille version of that. And of course, it's not just about whether or not you can see. Motor impairments could mean that you have difficulty turning the pages in a book or in a newspaper, for example. If you think about things like radio, you need to be able to hear that, and film and television requires you can both see it and hear it to get the full experience. Of course, you could have things like captions to make up for a person that can't hear the sound that goes along with the video, but it's not a full replacement. It's pretty good, but it is not the way that the media was intended to be viewed from the start. Electronic documents, though, create the biggest breakthrough for access to information by persons with disabilities. If you have a document in an electronic form, then it's up to the computer to render that document in whatever way is most appropriate for the user. In the 1980s, things like large print displays and screen readers allowed lots of people with visual impairments to interact with computers. They could become authors, they could write, they could disseminate information that way. What was lacking was a widely available means of distributing the documents in an electronic format. When the internet became widely available in the 1990s, it solved that problem, because now information can be posted on web pages, it can be sent by email, it can easily be distributed from one computer to another, and every user can have that information displayed to them in a format that they are able to perceive. Of course, even with electronic documents, it's a visual world. Most people are reading their documents visually, and so the #1 question people ask is, what does my web page look like? And a lot of web accessibility is about making it so that it looks the way people want and is also accessible. It has the features under the hood which make it accessible. So if we look at this example web page here, you can see the structure of the page. Because you can see it, you immediately are able to comprehend something of the semantic structure, the structure of the meaning of this page. We can see there's a heading for the entire page, there's 2 subheadings, and under the second subheading, there's some bulleted text, a list, and we can recognize the visual conventions that we use to convey that kind of information. The headings are larger text, they're in bold, the bullets are there to delineate the list. And here's the HTML, which could result in a page like that. You can see there's the H1 tag, which goes around the main heading of the page. The subheadings have H2, and if you want to have subheadings, you could have H3 and all the way down to H6 if you need to. The paragraph text has the P element wrapped around it to mark that it's a paragraph. And the list, it's an unordered list, so it's got bullets instead of numbers, and that's delineated by the OL, and every item inside the list is an LI for list item. So when a web browser sees the HTML like this, it knows how to render it. It makes the appropriate text big and bold, and it adds the bullet characters and all that sort of thing to make it look the way that it should, so that we understand the semantics of the page. However, I could make a web page that looks like this, but doesn't use any of those tags. I can use other tags that would manually make some text bigger and manually make some of it bold and manually type in the bullet characters. And the result would be that it would look like this, but it wouldn't have these tags that represent the semantics of the page. And these semantic tags are important because it allows technology like a screen reader to understand the structure of the page and present it in a way that can be used by a person that can't see it. So for example, a screen reader coming to this page could announce to the user that there are so many subheadings. It could read out all the subheadings. When it gets to the list, it can help the user to orient with what's coming next by saying list of 3 items. And then the user is able to better understand what is going on. So there's no WYSIWYG on the web. What you see is what you get. That may be fine in a word processor where you're going to print the document, but on the web, you can have pages that look the same, but under the hood, there are important differences. So let's look for a moment again at some of the different impairments that people may have. If you have a visual impairment, you're not able to see the screen, or you may not be able to perceive color, or you may need to use a screen magnifier, which means you're only looking at a very small part of a larger screen. A person using a screen reader needs to have a web page that is understandable when you're listening to it being read out. There are also refreshable braille displays where there are little pins that can be moved up and down by the computer. In some cases, they will have a whole line of text where it will put a line of text up and the user is able to read it using their fingers. In some cases, the braille display just has room for one character and it just flashes one character after the other, and the user is able to get the information that way. Now, not everyone with a visual impairment knows how to read braille. It's a skill you have to master, and certainly not everybody does it because it is difficult. And so using tools like screen readers is very widespread. People, of course, could also use screen magnifiers. They can use tools that will change the color on the screen to create higher contrast. In particular, people may want to have the screen in inverted colors or with a yellow on black. That is a color pattern that many people find easier to read. Hearing impairments could mean that videos need to have captions for any dialogue, and having transcripts available is also helpful. If you have like a podcast where it's just an audio recording, providing a transcript is a very useful way of allowing a user to get access to that information. A person with a motor disability may not be able to use a mouse. They may be using the keyboard only, or they may not be able to use their hands, so they may be controlling a keyboard with a wand that is attached to their head, so they can move their head and the wand will press on the keys. They may be using voice control, where there's a voice recognition software which understands what they are saying. There are sip and puff interfaces, which is like a little straw, which you put in your mouth, and there's a device that can detect the movement of air in the straw, and so the user can sip and puff small amounts of air in and out of the straw, and they're able to control the computer that way. Perhaps by having it so when they sip, it will move an indicator to the next key on a virtual keyboard, and when they puff, it'll select that one. It's slow, but it's a lot faster than doing nothing at all, and it allows the user to control a computer. I saw a photo once of a user who was controlling a video game system where they had the joystick set up so they could reach it with their chin, and there were two sip and puff interfaces which controlled the different fire buttons. And so they were able to do all the things that a regular game controller is able to do, entirely using their head. They didn't have any use of their arms or hands. Cognitive disabilities can include things like dyslexia or other reading disabilities or learning disabilities. So as I mentioned, a person may be using a screen reader and listening to the contents of a page at the same time as they are reading it by looking at the page. And photoepilepsy is an example of a disability where a person can have seizures caused by certain kinds of visual images, in particular flickering. Lights, like if you are making an animation and maybe there's some lightning going off in the background, flickering lights in certain frequencies can trigger this. And so if you're working on animation, you need to learn what these frequencies are and avoid those. And of course, people who have disabilities want to be able to participate in the life of our community. And so we just have to meet them halfway by providing the tools needed that they are able to participate. This is a slide here of a production of The Wizard of Oz in England, where it's been captioned by a company called Stage Text. At certain performances, they will put these caption blocks on the front of the screen, and so a person with a visual impairment is able to go to the show and they can see the action and the dancing, and they can follow the story and the lyrics by reading the text on these panels. I've also seen productions of theater where there are people doing sign language. They'll be standing off to one side in front of the stage, and so people that can read sign language would sit in a particular part of the theater where they're able to see both the stage and the people giving the sign language, and so they're able to convey the dialogue that way and allow them to enjoy the theater show. So what can we do about these disabilities? We have the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines to help us. We are currently required to meet WCAG version 2.0 level AA by the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. WCAG is now at version 2.1, and version 2.2 is being developed. These newer versions provide additional accessibility criteria which reflect newer ways that people are using the internet, in particular touchscreen devices and portable devices. So WCAG comes in 3 levels: level A, AA, and AAA. I think there's a Canadian on the design team who named that. And these guidelines are things like having alternative text for images. So if you can't see the image, the alternative text provides the information in a different format. So why do we do this? Well, the most important thing is human rights. The University of Waterloo believes that every member of our community should be able to fully participate in the life of our community. And accessibility on websites is a critical part of that. But there are other advantages too. Search engine optimization is one of them. The semantic information, which helps with accessibility, is also useful by search engines when they are indexing web pages. And so your pages will tend to rank higher if they are made accessible. There's wider device compatibility. Over the past decade or so, there's been an explosion in new kinds of devices that people use to access web pages. We don't know what the next sort of devices will be, but the semantic information, which is usable for accessibility, will also help any new device to figure out how it should be rendering that information to the user. And of course, we have a legal requirement. I mentioned the AODA, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and that requires us to provide web pages that are accessible. We've been under this requirement since January of 2021. We need to have all our content at the AA level. So let's have a look at a couple of videos that show some disabled users and how they use the internet. So this is a video of a person who uses a head mouse to control their computer, and this allows them to interact with it even though they have a motor disability, which means they cannot use a keyboard or mouse. And I think I have to, someone will tell me if it is not sharing the audio, and then I will go and reshare with the audio.
I've always been drawing as a kid.
Can you hear that?
And using a pencil, of course. And it became my profession, or
I think I can hear it.
Nowadays, I do everything on the computer, drawing and working with photographs. I design all kinds of graphics, such as icons, CD covers, t-shirts. I use standard graphic software, mostly Photoshop. What is special is that since I cannot use my hands, I use an on-screen keyboard, keystrokes, and the Origin head mouse to control my computer. The funny thing is that my speed with the mouse is faster than most people. Keystrokes is more than just a way to type, it's the way for me to control the computer. I've got this environmental control. I've got a few buttons next to my head. Pressing them, I control the lights, the door, the telephone, the windows. I live by myself independently, but I do of course get a lot of care. In the beginning I didn't have any control over my care. My life was dictated by the care system, so I decided to develop my own care system, and right now I'm working with others to make it available for all people in Holland. Keystrokes and the Origin head mouse are very important to me. Without them, I wouldn't have access to my computer. I really don't want to think about my life without a computer. I'd probably not be able to live by myself without a computer. I'd be in an institution. And I've seen some institutions where I don't want to live.
Okay, so that was an example of a user who has a sip and puff interface, and the head mouse and other technology, and allows them to interact with their computer and work as a graphic designer. We have another video which shows how a screen reader works. what it will do is it's going to read through this web page, and you'll be able to hear what the screen reader is doing as the user is moving through. Now they're controlling it with the keyboard, so they're using mostly the tab key to move from item to item throughout the web page, and as it goes on to each item, it reads out what's happening. And what you'll hear is the text that you see on the page, and also additional information about what kind of information it's reading, like a list or a tab or that sort of thing. And that extra information is there to help orient the user to what is going on and what part of the page they're in and what kinds of interactions they're able to do. So let's have a watch of this.
Generally, when testing, you'll run the website through a screen reader. So in this case, we're going to run the showcase site through Chromevox.
Banner, skip to main content, internal link, accessibility, link, home, menu item 1 of 2. Examples, menu item with submenu 2 of 2. Basic HTML, menu item with submenu 1 of 2. Links, menu item 1 of 5. Images, tables, headings, menu forms, basic HTML, menu item, JavaScript widgets, tooltips, menu item 1 of 1. Exited showcase navigation menu with 2 items. Examples, menu item with submenu 2 of 2. Menu with 2 items. JavaScript widgets, menu item with submenu 2 of 2. Slide 3, use right and left arrow keys to navigate through the slides. Banner. Slide 1. Slide 2. Slide 3.
When testing rotating banners, be sure they are keyboard operable and the text associated with each panel gets read.
Home navigating websites can be quite challenging for people who rely on assistive technology. On this website, we will illustrate the most common accessibility. Article list with 2 items. Bad example. Tab selected. Good example. Tab selected. Bad example. Tab selected. Bad example. Bad examples illustrate incorrect use of HTML and / or JavaScript code. List with 2 items. Bad example. Bad example. Back to help at Ryerson.ca. Complementary tab list. General information. Tab collapsed 1 of 2. Expanded 1 of 2. Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG 2.0 Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act AODA. Tech list with 2 items. Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act AODA. Link list item. Web General information. Collapse 1 of 2. Evaluation tools. Tab collapse 2 of 2. Expanded 2 of 2. Web accessibility evaluation tool. Wave a checker contrast a color tool. Web AIM color contrast checker. List with 4 a checker. Contrast a color tool. Web AIM color contrast checker. Link list set. A checker. Web accessibility evaluation tool. Wave a checker contrast a color tool. Web evaluation tools. Tab expanded 2 of 2. Collapse 2 of 2. Exited section complementary tab list. Go to the Chang School website. Link content info.
Showcase site works pretty well with Chromevox, so now.
Okay, we'll stop it there. So, as you can see, it can be a little difficult to figure out exactly what the screen reader is doing, especially since it reads so quickly. So using a screen reader is itself a skill that needs to be developed. And if you've ever heard a screen reader in use by an experienced user, they have the speed turned up even faster than what you were hearing there, in order for it to not take so long to get through web pages. But how does a screen reader work? What does it do? Basically, it starts at the top of the page and it reads down. Now, what do you do when you have information that's beside each other? Well, it reads in the order of the HTML source. If we turn off the style sheets, then what we're looking at is the web page with just what's there from the HTML. And what a screen reader will do is it will start at the top and just read through the whole page. So if we were to start here, for example, we'll just ignore that header for now. It would say header level 1, quick facts, header level 2, a model of 21st century university. And when it gets to a list like this, it will announce list of 5 items. And that helps to orient the user as to what is coming. When it gets down to an image like this, it will read the alternative text. So that is some extra text which doesn't show up on the screen, but it's part of the HTML source, and it is there to get read when the image cannot be displayed. So you have to somehow replace the text in the image with the alt text. So this is a simple way of getting an idea as to what a screen reader will see, because basically it will just read what is there from top to bottom. Other things that can be done with a screen reader is the user can ask their screen reader to read all the headings. So heading level 1, heading level 2, all of these headings. That's a way of scanning the page. If you go to a web page and you're able to see it, you might glance down the whole page before you decide what piece you're actually going to read. So a similar way of doing that, if you can't see the page, is to have the screen reader read out all the headings. Another way is to have it read out all the link text. So that's these bits of text here that you click on to move to another page. And of course, the screen reader is only able to read out the headings if they are marked up as headings. If you've manually made some text bold, the computer doesn't know that it's a heading, and it's not able to include that in the list of headings that it reads out. So I mentioned that there's alt text, where anytime it gets to an image, it will read out this text instead. So we have to think about how do you write good alt text? Let's think about that for a moment. The problem is that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and your alt text had better not be 1,000 words. That's way too much. So you need to communicate the meaning of the image accurately and succinctly. Now, there's a few things which can simplify that. There are if you have images that are purely decorative, they're only there for decoration purposes. Those do not need alt text because they're not really conveying information. In many cases, those images will be added by the style sheet, and so they do not show up in the HTML at all. If you have an image that's in the HTML but is only decorative and not really adding information to the page, then the alt text can be left empty, and the screen reader will skip over it. So in the HTML, it would have alt equals and then quote, quote, with nothing between the quotes. If you try to do that in the WCMS, it won't let you do that. It won't let you leave the alt text of an image blank, because it's expecting that any image you add to the body section of a page is information that conveys it is an image that conveys information, and so it needs to have full alt text. Of course, it can't check that the alt text is well written. This is an area where human judgment comes in, and a lot of aspects of accessibility are like this, where you need to exercise human judgment to make sure that it's been done correctly. The computer can check if there is alt text. It can't check if it's properly written. So, what should you write in your alt text? You've got to summarize the image accurately and succinctly. It's not repeating information that is in an image caption, because the user is able to read that. It's the alt text is supposed to convey the information that is not in the caption and not in the adjacent text. You don't have to include words like image of, because the screen reader knows that it's an image. It will take care of that. But it could be relevant to be specific about the kind of image, like screenshot of, or pencil sketch of, or aerial photograph. If you have an infographic, that can have quite a bit of information in a single thing. And in many cases, the best way of handling that is to have a text version either further down the page or on a separate page, and the alt text can just say like infographic text version follows or something like that. And then you're able to use all of HTML for the text version of the information. You don't have to worry about the the alt text not being able to fit the entire information. If you have a text-only image, like maybe an email us link that just has the words email us, that's fine. Just make the alt text be the text that is in the image. And your alt text should have proper punctuation and full sentences, because the screen reader can use the punctuation and capitalization and all that sort to make sure that it is properly pronouncing the information. Okay. Let's have a look at some example images. And so let's think about what would the alt text be for this image. And we're coming up now on the break time. So we have a 10-minute break in the middle, and we're at the middle now. So what we'll do, we'll take that break, and while we're doing that, you can think about what would you use as alt text for this image? How would you summarize the meaning of this image in an accurate and succinct way that we could use as alt text? We'll come back in 10 minutes and we'll talk about it then. Hello, everyone. So, what do you think about alt text for this image? Does anyone have any suggestions about what you might use as alt text for this image? You can type that in the chat, or you could unmute and speak it aloud. Okay, registered trademark statement, I Heart New York. Okay, yeah, that's getting at the idea that this is not just any old I Love New York idea. It's a specific logo which was created in 1976 by the New York State Tourism Commission. Okay, clip art of Heart and New York abbreviation. Okay. Yep, getting at the idea that there's a heart there. It's not the word heart. It's NY, but definitely the abbreviation for New York. Okay. One of the things you could include in alt text for something like this is the heart symbol itself. As you're familiar with, your computer is capable of a lot of characters, not just the letters, numbers, and punctuation. Of course, you've got all kinds of emojis, and one of the characters that's part of Unicode, which is the character set that computers use now, is a heart character. So you could include that heart character right in the alt text. So you could put like RI followed by the heart character, NY, and then logo. And when a screen reader gets to that, it would read out the name of the character. So it would say something like I Heart NY logo or something like that. I'm not sure exactly how it would read it out, but that'd be up to the computer to do it in a way that would be understandable to the user. Okay, let's have a look at another image here. What about this one? First of all, does anyone know what this is at any level of detail? Does anyone take chemistry? Ketone? Okay, so this is a chemical formula. This is how chemists would draw the formula for a chemical, and I understand that this is acetone. So how might you write an alt text for this? Any ideas about that? And remember that it could vary depending on where you are using this image. Imagine if you had the homepage of the Faculty of Science and you wanted to have an image to identify the different departments. So you might have like the astronomy department identified by some pictures of some stars or planets. and maybe biology with a picture of a cell, and chemistry by this one. Does it really matter which chemical it is in that case? And what could you use as the alt text? Okay, and in that case, you could probably just say that it's a chemical formula, because it doesn't really matter which one it is. But if you had a page that's inside a course, and you had 10 different chemical formulas going down the page, and they were all different, it wouldn't really help any if you just said chemical formula, chemical formula, chemical formula for each one. You need to be specific about which one it is. And it could also depend on what you're trying to say with it. For example, in some contexts, you might just say chemical formula for acetone. That might be fine. But if the text preceding it says the chemical formula for acetone is, and then you've got this image, it doesn't help if you just say chemical formula for acetone. You have to somehow convey what the formula actually is. In that case, I would suggest making the alt text be chemical formula : and then after that you put the letters that represent the formula. There is a way of writing chemical formula that you can type on a single line of text. It looks sort of like a mathematical equation, and there's lots of brackets, but it's basically a way of flattening a chemical formula image like this one into a line of text that you can just type into a chat or an email or whatever. So you could just say chemical formula : and then the chemical formula written out that way. Okay, what about this one? How much you write alt text for this? Any ideas about this one? Okay, drawing of a potted plant. Okay. Yep. In some context, that could be right, depending on what you were trying to say. You may want to say a little bit more about what kind of plant it is, or the style of drawing. Depicting of a specific plant, a painting depicting yellow and orange flowers. Okay, yeah. If you were talking about on a page that's about the art, you might want to talk about some of the details. Sunflowers painting by Vincent. Okay, the fact that it's a Van Gogh painting might be important. Vincent van Gogh painting of potted plants. Van Gogh's sunflowers, painting of orange flowers in a potted plant. Yeah, there's lots of possibilities. The important thing is to think about, why am I putting this on the page? What information am I trying to convey? And that way, you can come up with what the appropriate alt text is. If you were just trying to get across the idea generally of some art or some flowers, you might do it one way. But if you were had a page that was specifically about different still life paintings or about Van Gogh's work, you might need to talk about different aspects of the use of color or the subject matter, whatever it is. So think about, why am I adding this image to the page? What am I trying to say? And then you can come up with the alt text that would replace that meaning. Okay, and what about this one? Okay, aerial view of area. Okay, does anyone recognize what this is an aerial view of? Okay, aerial shot of University of Waterloo campus. That's right. Yep. bird's eye view of busy metropolitan. Okay, yeah, and that could be important if you're trying to show the idea that the campus is a busy area or has lots of large buildings. You may want to convey something about that. It might be important to convey the fact that there are trees visible. That it's you know, perhaps a University of Waterloo campus in fall colors. To convey that there are green spaces on campus. Sometimes when I've given this course to staff, they've suggested that the most important thing about the image is the parking in the upper left. I guess it all depends on your perspective about what is important. But again, think about why are you adding this image to the page? What are you trying to say with it? And you can come up with appropriate alt text. Okay, let's look a little bit at semantic HTML. So that's using HTML to convey the meaning of the information on the page. So this is the Faculty of Environment webpage, and we have here the news and the events. You can see that we have links in the headings of these. Let's go through and have a look at the news page. And you'll notice we have the same pattern here where each of the headlines is a link. You'll often see pages like this, and there'll be a heading and then a teaser, and then at the bottom there'll be a link that says read more. Well, if you are coming to this page and you're asking your screen reader to read out only the link text, and all you've got is these read more links going down the page, you're just going to hear read more, read more, read more over and over again. That's not very useful. So that's why we have it set so that the headings are the thing you actually click on. The link text should be the title of the page you're linking to, or some kind of other text that helps you to understand what you are going to get if you click on it. And this is really useful for search engine optimization, because search engines will look at the words people use to link to other pages, and they'll use that to decide how to index a particular page. So if you have a bunch of stories and they're using read more as the link, you might find those pages if someone goes into a search engine and they search for read more. Well, people aren't going to be searching for that. They're going to be searching for terms that have something to do with the page. So it is important to choose your link text well. Similarly, if we have a page here, and maybe in the running text, you have an image off to one side, and the running text says something like, you know, click on the image to visit whatever. Well, if I can see this, it's no problem. Like there could be a link here that says, you know, to learn more about undergraduate admissions, click on the learn more link on the side. Oh, that's okay. Here we go. No problem. But a screen reader doesn't have that physical relationship between the sidebar and the main area of the text. They're going to see it more like when style sheets are turned off, where you've got the text is here, and then it's down here that we have the content of the sidebar. And in some cases, it can be a lot further down the page. It could be, you know, way on the far corner of it before you get to that text. So you should never have it so one part of the page is telling you to click on a different part. It's perfectly okay to have more than one link that goes to the same place. So you can have your call to action here, learn more about undergraduate admissions, and then inside the body text you could also say, you know, you are welcome to learn more about undergraduate admissions, and that can be a link as well, and then the user is able to use it right there. It's important to have skip links and landmarks to make it easy to navigate. if I have to tab through this page, you can see that skip to main and skip to footer appear. So those are links that are hidden that only show up when they have focus from the keyboard. And what these skip links do is they jump over all the bits of the heading, all the navigation stuff, which is the same page to page. So a user coming to the page doesn't have to read through all that stuff. And it will instead, it will skip right down to the page content. It'll skip right through to the heading, allowing the user to get to the main body of the page. If you're doing template design, it's a good idea to put those in. A modern, more sophisticated version of that is something called landmarks, where different parts of the page can be designated as landmarks, and the screen reader can tell the user that certain landmarks exist and that the person can jump to it. For example, a landmark could be the main navigation, it could be the header, it can be the footer, it can be the main body of the page, it can be the search box. There's a bunch of different landmarks that are available as part of the WAY area, or accessible rich internet applications vocabulary. If you're designing templates, you should read up more on those. If you have links that are repeated page to page, such as these headings here, it's important that they're always in the same order. That'll make it a lot easier for a user. They can become accustomed to the order of them, and they might memorize that, oh yeah, offices and services, that's the fourth one down, so they can quickly tab over to it if that's the one that they're interested in at a given moment. But if they're changing all over the place, then they have to listen to it every single time if they're using a screen reader. Part of semantic HTML is having headings that nest properly. Every page should have one H1 element, which is the title of the whole page. In this case, it's accessibility, and the page is divided up into two header level 2s. There's this one here, and then down here, additional resources. And then there's header level 3s, how to comply and scope. And headings need to nest properly, where you have one H1, which is divided into H2s, which may be divided into H3s and H4s. They have to nest, and you don't skip levels. We want to use list markup even for things that don't look like lists. So, for example, on the home page, we have these news items. There's 5 news items. That's actually a list of news items. It's an unordered list. If a screen reader comes upon this, it will read out the heading, news, and then list of 5 items, and it'll read each of them in turn. But that means the user can quickly skip to the next one if they want to. There are keystrokes available inside a screen reader, which allows the user to just jump over to the next list item or jump entirely to the end of the list. So you want to use markup based on the semantics of the information, not so much on the appearance. You can always use style sheets to change the appearance. It's important to use tables properly. Here's a page that has a table used correctly, where there's table rows and table columns. They've all got headers, and when it's done this way, the user is able to navigate easily in the table. For example, a student could be going across the first row and they get to say international, and if they're international, then they can go down that column and listen to all the information that is in that column and not read out every column in the table. These headings, these cells that are gray with the bold headings, those are table header cells, or TH. The other cells with a white background are table data, or TD. If you use headings properly, then the screen reader is able to understand which heading cells apply to which data cells, and it can read out the appropriate headers for each cell. That makes it a lot easier to navigate the table, especially if it is a large and complicated one. There is a separate training course that we have on making HTML tables. It's interactive, where you start with a bunch of tables that are not done correctly, and you add markup to make them more accessible. One comment I'd make about this is this blank cell here should be a table data cell. It should be a TD if there's nothing in it. Or perhaps it should have text added to it, which is like media type or type of material or something like that. There had to be a bit of thought put into what should go there. But there should never be a header that is empty. There are some things that look like tables but are not. So this is in a 2x2 sort of grid. It looks like it's kind of a table. And it used to be back in the day that people would lay out web pages by making big tables, and sometimes they'd have big tables nested inside tables, sometimes many layers deep. You could make very elaborate layouts that way, but they were very inaccessible. It'd be very confusing to understand where you are in this thing. You can do your visual layout however you like, however works for what you're doing, but if your information is not semantically a table, it should not be in a table. And in fact, this is not a table. If I turn off style sheets, you can see that all this text is just down the page. It's a bunch of lists with headings in between them. It's the style sheet that moves it around and puts it in that table-like appearance. So the important thing is that the HTML is conveying the semantics of the page. If you're doing forms, it's important to have form labels. In the top example here, you can see there's an input element of type text. So the input element creates a place where you're able to type. And in this case, we could see that there's a search label to the left of it. If you can see this form, it's easy to understand what should be typed there. But on a screen reader, it's not always obvious what should be typed into each form control, especially if you have a very large form that has first name and last name and address and email and phone number. It could be quite confusing. So it's important that every form control has a label associated with it. If you look in the second example there's an ID attribute of search terms that has been added to the input element. And then there's a label element that's been added around the word search. And there's a for attribute on the label, which associates that label with the input. So when a screen reader gets to the input, it's able to look at its ID and then check the document for any labels that have a for attribute of the same value. And then it will read that label when it is in that input element, and then the user will know what they are supposed to type into that box. This is just scratching the surface of what you need to do if you are making forms from scratch. Fortunately, in our Drupal system, we have the web form system, which allows you to very easily build forms, and it takes care of all of the accessibility for you. And if you're doing programming on the Drupal platform, you can use the form API, and that will also take care of this kind of stuff for you. But be aware, if you are doing other stuff where you're not using a toolkit that provides those things for you, you need to be particularly careful to have form labels for any kind of form controls that you have on your page. Of course, color contrast is very important. You may be able to read this slide, but there are many users who can't because there's not enough contrast. So it's important to have a high degree of contrast. The number we use is 4.5 to 1, and there are tools that you can use to calculate the color contrast between pairs of colors. So if you are doing any design work, you need to make sure that you have enough color contrast. It's also important that you don't rely on color by itself to convey information. For example, if you had a list of members of the faculty in a department, you could make all the faculty with tenure have names that are written in red, for example. And that'd be fine if you could see the page, but if you can't see it, you wouldn't be able to tell who has tenure and who doesn't. So it's not that you can't use color, it's that you can't rely on color by itself. So in this case, if you wanted to identify people with tenure, you could perhaps have an asterisk after the name of the person, and then at the top of the list say, faculty members with tenure are denoted by, and then have the asterisk. And then if a screen reader is coming to this page, it would read that text, and as it reads down the list of faculty, it would be reading out that there's an asterisk, and the user would understand that these are the ones with tenure. Of course, you can also make it red or whatever color you choose. And then if a person is able to see the page, but they can't perceive the color differences, they could still see the asterisk. They would still be able to understand what people on this list have tenure and which do not. It's important to be able to navigate the web page with the keyboard. So imagine for a moment you don't have a mouse. You're only using the keyboard, and persons with motor impairments may be doing that, or if you're not able to see, it's pretty hard to use a mouse because you can't tell what you're pointing at. So many users are only using the keyboard, and in some cases when users have other kinds of input devices like a sip and puff interface, they may not be using a keyboard directly, but they are using something that interfaces with a keyboard. So if our system is usable from just the keyboard, then the assistive technologies will be able to interface with that. So you need to be able to get through the page and control every aspect of it just using the keyboard. So if I hit tab here, you can see that the different news items, the one that has focus is changing color. There's a yellow background. If I hit tab, it goes forward, and if I hit shift tab, it goes back. So that allows me to move through. And you can see now that I've tabbed out onto view all news, there's a thin outline that goes around it. If I hit tab again, now it's on find an expert. So that's telling me where I have focus. So you should be checking that there is some kind of focus indicator. It'd be nice maybe if the focus indicator was brighter so it could be seen more easily. But that's a design issue. Now you'll notice here, now that I'm on these tab panels, I can use the arrow keys and I can move between the tab panels, and then I can move into them using the tab key. So this is fully controllable from just the keyboard, and that's exactly what we want. It's also good if it will work when JavaScript is turned off. Some users have JavaScript turned off because it means that the page will not be changing on them. And we've designed our things so that if you do turn off JavaScript, it will still work correctly. So let's do that now. I'll turn it off, it'll reload the page, and you can see it looks about the same. But if I click on these, it will reload the page with a different panel selected. So it's not quite as convenient. It's not quite as smooth as when JavaScript is turned on, but it still works, and that's the important thing. You'll also notice when JavaScript is turned on here that we have these banners that rotate, but there's a pause button. I'm able to pause the autoplay of that. Some users have difficulty looking at a web page and reading it if the page is moving and changing. I find that particularly difficult when there's ads running. If there are animated ads, then I say next to an article, I have a lot of difficulty reading the article. So I use this NoScript tool to turn off JavaScript and selectively so I can prevent animated ads from running. There's also ad blockers that will do a similar thing. On a similar vein, it's important that there isn't anything that's blinking on the page. When you've got things blinking, that's a distraction. And people that have any kind of cognitive disability may find that even more of a distraction than it is for other users, and they'll have difficulty reading the web page. It's important to think about file formats. HTML is designed with a lot of accessibility features built in, so it's preferable to make ordinary HTML web pages instead of posting documents as PDF or as a word processing document. It's possible to make these documents accessible, but doing so is more difficult, and it's more difficult to verify that you've succeeded in creating an accessible document. So the best thing is just to avoid it. Another thing to think about is if you have a phone or other device with a small screen, it can be difficult to read a PDF because PDFs are normally made for page-sized documents. They're a lot wider than a typical phone screen. HTML pages on a small screen, they can adjust to the small screen size, but PDF documents have much more difficulty doing that. So it doesn't just help people that may be using a screen reader or other assistive technologies like that, but it's helpful for anyone who is browsing on the phone. And if you look at browsing stats now, a huge amount of web browsing is done from tablets, phones, and other devices that have got small screens. Think about audio contrast. If you have too much background sounds in your video, it may be difficult to hear what people are saying. And you can provide transcripts anytime you have an audio recording of speech. In particular, if you have a video that is maybe the dean's welcome message, and it's a talking head where he says his words of wisdom, you could put captions on that video, and that would provide access to what the person is saying. But it doesn't make a lot of sense to force the person to read through at the same speed that the person is speaking at. You might as well just provide a transcript, and the user is then able to read at their own pace. Just make sure it's clearly labeled that this is the transcript for that video, and then it's fine. Similarly, you can use alternative formats in other ways. For example, if you did want to put on your website a PDF of a poster for your event, there's nothing wrong with putting up a PDF, but there should also be an HTML version of the same information. If you have an HTML page, which is the page for your event, and it contains all the information on your advertising poster, and then you can say, you can have a link that says download PDF of this page or download PDF of the event poster. If you have some kind of text that makes it clear that the PDF has the same information as your HTML page, then you can put the PDF there, and users will know they're not missing out on anything by not reading that PDF. Some other tools. This is the markup validation service, validator.w3.org. It checks the markup of HTML pages to see that they are following the rules of the HTML language. If you are passing validation, then that makes it much more likely that a wide variety of tools that a person may be using to view the websites, such as web browsers and other assistive technologies, will see the page in the same way. It generates errors and warnings. So this has been run on the Higgy Lectures page. You can see there are a few warnings. There aren't any errors. Errors are the really critical problems which could cause the page to be parsed differently by different software. So you definitely don't want any of those. There are a few warnings here, which are just quality improvements that might improve the accessibility of the page. In particular here, it's noticing the fact that there are some article elements and section elements that don't have a heading. So the page has been divided up with section and article elements, but there aren't headings for those. So it'd be good to add those. And this is something that should be done at the template level in the WCMS. So what you're aiming for is that you get no warnings and no errors, but the most important thing is that there are no error messages. Another tool is the Wave Accessibility Checker. This can be installed in your browser as a browser extension. It can also be run as a web page. And here's an example of what it looks like when it's run on the environment web page. So you can see that the page is here. and it looks mostly as it does, but what's been added are these little annotations which explain characteristics of the page. So for example, it says that this is an H1. And so I can look at this page and I can ask myself, should this be an H1? Is it an H1? Yes. It makes it easier for me to assess the page because I can tell easily where different tags have been used, and I can verify that they are being used where they're supposed to be used and are not being used where they shouldn't be. Another one over here, you can see I hover over this, and when I click on it, it tells me it's an unordered list. So I ask myself, should this be an unordered list? Yes, absolutely. What we have here is a list of navigation items. That should be a list. I can click on this reference thing and it will explain what it's actually checking for. I can click on the code link and it will show me the HTML code of that particular part of the page. So that can help me to understand what this tool is seeing and what code is leading to that. If I click on details, it gives me a list of all the items on the page that it's found. So you can see there are a couple of alerts that it's concerned about. So a redundant link is where you've got a couple of identical links next to each other. In this case, I think what it's saying is there's two links that go to the same thing right next to each other. In some cases, that's fine. So you can make a judgment call and you may decide that this is perfectly okay. What you don't want is to have error messages. There can also be red error messages that would come up here. For example, if you had a form control that did not have a label, it would bring that up. If you had an image that did not have alt text, it would bring it up there. You need to make sure there aren't any of those. Speaking of alt text, this tool allows me to see what the alt text is. So here it is, this little icon represents alt text. Melting ice in water. Okay, yeah. And so I can look at the image, I can look at the alt text, and I can make a judgment call as to whether or not the alt text has been well written for that image. Now I want to stress that a lot of accessibility is about making judgment calls. You can't just run it and, oh, there's no errors, it's fine. You need to go through more carefully and check other things. But certainly as a starting point, getting it to the point where there are no errors is an important first step. If you're doing any color work, there are various color checking tools that you can use. For example, here's one that will scan a page and look at the different pairings of colors, foreground and background colors, and it will do the calculations to see whether there's enough color contrast. So if you're doing any color design work, it's important to use a tool like this. If you want to check your web page in a screen reader to see what it sounds like when it's read out, if you're using a Mac, there's a screen reader called VoiceOver that is built in. You can turn that on in the accessibility panel and listen to that. If you're using Windows, there is a free software screen reader called NVDA, or Non-Visual Desktop Access. You can download that and give that one a try. Just be aware that even if your web page seems difficult to understand in a screen reader, it might be fine for a person who is accustomed to using the tool. It does take practice to get used to using it, but still it can be useful to try it out. There's also a screen reader called ChromeVox, which is an add-on that goes inside the Chrome web browser. There are other courses that are available through ITPD, or the Information Technology Personal Development courses, which relate to web accessibility. It's covered in writing for the web and accessible digital design. There's also the Creating Accessible Tables course that I mentioned earlier. There's also a course about accessible Word and PDF, which looks at how to use Microsoft Office to create documents and create PDFs that are accessible. So those are all other courses that you could look at if you're interested. As well, there are other training courses on lynda.com which go into other areas. And of course, many web pages which cover all sorts of details. If you are working on accessibility and you want someone to have a look at a page you're working on, or if you have any questions, you can always talk to me or another one of the developers on the team, and we can have a look at your work and give our feedback. We want to make sure that we are passing on our knowledge. So I'll take any questions you have now, and if you have any questions afterwards, you're always free to get in touch. Thank you very much for coming to the training today, and thank you for your commitment to making the University of Waterloo a place accessible for everybody by working on accessible web pages.